A very warm welcome to Capital Sports 3.0. I am one of your hosts, Alan Moore, and we should have an extra host joining us in a few minutes, but we'll go to Isla Cody just for a moment. Big week in sports, a lot going on and off the court, on and off the field, on and off the racetrack, basically just non-stop. Of course, the transfer window has just closed. The English Premier League, again, sort of showing us the financial power that they have at their fingertips and outspending everyone by multiple times, like 10, 20 times or at least 10 times by the nearest league in Europe. We'll speak about that in just a moment. We also have a very, let's just say, a story that's been controversial in a way. It has developed over possibly just over 2 weeks and actually longer than that as well, a number of months. We're going to discuss that about the Victoria Azarenka story as well, and her recent win over Marta Kostyuk from Ukraine. We also going to speak about a fairly nasty kind of incident that seemed to have gotten out of hand. Still, we can't really make much sense of it. This is an alleged racist incident in a women's volleyball game in Brigham Young University out in Utah. So we'll discuss that as well. Also, we'll have part 3 of our chat with Joe Papp. It is well worth waiting around for this because I promise you that some stuff he that he tells us has, kind of made the hair stand the back of my neck. Also, we will have a review, or I should say an overview of the classical 1977 movie Slapshot. And then we will have the Big Fat Filthy Quiz. So without further ado, I will bring in Isla Cody. Isla, how has your week been so far?
It has been a very good week. Spurs are not being too Spursy. All is good in the world.
Exactly. And Manchester United won today as well. So, I mean...
Oh, I said all is good in the world. Let's not take from it. Let's not... Even though Arsenal lost. So,
this is
jigs and swings and roundabouts, jigs and reels. It's all working out.
Okay. So, before we go into this first story, because the first story... it is about tennis. So tennis is always something that is interesting for us to cover. We'll play a video of an interview after the fact. So we're going to start from the most recent and work our way back a couple of weeks or a few months actually to where the story originated from. So this is Victoria Azarenka, the former two-time singles, 4 times in mixed doubles Grand Slam winner.
Well, I've offered many times through WTA because I believe that there is a sort of sensitivity, and I've been told that that's not a good time. In March, when everything happened, I've reached out to all the players that I personally know and I still have a good relationship with. I'm talking about Ukrainian players, of course. And, I don't feel that forcing myself to speak to somebody who maybe doesn't want to speak to me for different reasons is the right approach, but I offered. I feel like I've had a very clear message from the beginning, is that I'm here to try to help, which I have done a lot, maybe not something that people see. And that's not what I do it for. I do it for people who in need, juniors who need clothes, other people who need money, other people who needed transportation or whatever. That's what is important to me, to have people are in need. If Marta wants to speak with me, like she texted me yesterday, I've replied. I'm open to any time to listen, to try to understand, to sympathize. I believe that empathy in a moment like this is really important, which has, again, been my clear message in the beginning. And I'm going to stand by that because what's happening in the world is very difficult right now, but we shouldn't forget that we're all human and we should treat each other that way.
We're all human and we should treat each other that way. Isolt, we're going to put up on a screen the first part of this, how it broke out. This course in the, this is actually quite a good article from the Daily Mirror, that Marta Kostyuk, she refused to shake the hand of Victoria Azarenka after the game. Now, Kostyuk has form with this, but I mean, she's within her rights not to shake hands, because even under COVID protocols, that was the thing they did. They touched rackets after matches. Listening to Azarenka there, I mean, we'll speak about some other, the Faro incident or Faro situation just after this kind of little part. It does seem unfortunate this broke out, because Azarenka would be the least likely person that you'd want to be going up against, because she is a genuinely nice person.
Yeah, I suppose I have views on this, and a lot of it possibly comes down to my own views on Azarenka. As you said, she's in a very difficult position, as are a lot of athletes. A lot of athletes, we often say on the show, and we've discussed this, that athletes are in a position where they have a profile such that they need to speak out on various issues. In this instance, she, I think, had announced she was going to play in a tournament, which is sort of a Friends of Ukraine style tournament in the coming weeks. It's no longer, she's no longer going ahead in this. But I think what makes this situation a bit uncomfortable isn't the fact that she was being criticised for not coming out and openly condemning Russia and their actions in Ukraine. But it was the fact that, as she referenced in the interview there, she received a text beforehand to kind of say, "I'm not going to shake your hand, this is why," or to that effect, basically. And I think she felt, as she said, she was open to talking to Kostyuk. She'd reached out to players previously. And I think something about I'm going to send you a text, and I think this permeates a lot of relationships in our society, is you have the opportunity to have a discussion with someone, find out what their position is. I don't think at any point, as Azarenka has said, she's pro the Russian stance on Ukraine. She's obviously Belarusian, and there's a difficulty there, or a conflict in terms of what it's felt by her opponent in that instance she needs to come out and do. And I don't like the idea of us telling an athlete what level of their media interaction is appropriate for her to be deemed to be condemning, because clearly she's reached out to players, and she also is a very strong voice in terms of tennis, in terms of women's players in particular. And I think that, and the issue we're going to move on to in a minute, is detracted from by someone deciding what level of your support is good enough. And I think if they'd had a discussion beforehand, and then after that the decision was, look, we're going to go with the COVID style, tap rackets, I'm not going to shake your hand, then fine. But the fact that it was a text, and both parties have now said there was a text sent, have a discussion. You're adults, you're on a tour, you may be competitors, but this is a woman who, I suppose, if it was other people, I might take a very different view. But I think she has done nothing but always shown herself to be a consummate professional and an advocate for other competitors in her sport.
Very true. I mean, I know her personally from, we had a number of brief interactions, because I was working with tennis players from Belarus. Always very helpful to younger players, to lower ranked players. You know, when they would go to America to tour, she would say, "Come stay with me." She helped out people all along. And I know, because I went into this before we kind of like set the topics for today's show, because I wanted to see what other people were thinking of her, both Russians and Ukrainians as well. People were disappointed by Kostyuk, but not surprised. Azarenka was very, very to the fore. Like we scroll across here at the bottom of the screen, her statement, and she put herself out on a limb. A number of Russian and Belarusian players did as well. When even footballers like Fyodor Smolov, they said, "No, stop the war. We want peace. We want peace." It does seem that, and I heard this back from one Russian tennis player who has just left the tour last year, and she said, even though, you know, many of her Ukrainian friends, they've stayed friends, they've spoken on things, and privately and publicly they're okay together. They said there are some of them, like Kostyuk, because again, she's a relatively young girl from a very well-connected family. It's kind of like you either condemn and hate, or you're not with them. So it's a strange kind of George Bush II thing.
I think it's possibly a very difficult position for people on either side here to be in, and particularly if you're a young person who's witnessing what's going on in terms of for your friends and family. All you want is bigger names than you, and let's face it, Kostya is she's a name in tennis, but you're talking about Azarenka, who's just so high profile. It's like having a Serena Williams, only she's Belarusian. Come in that sense, it's that high a profile. So I can understand you're almost trying to force someone to give the statement you want, but it's not a case of someone who hasn't condemned. It's just they haven't said exactly what you want, and it's a very difficult position for everyone to be in. I just hope that players will appreciate that there are other ways of going about things, and a discussion. If there had been a discussion, maybe my view would be differently, that they both looked at this and said, here's how we're going to deal with this. As Yanka has said, nothing but I'm reaching out, I'm checking on Ukrainian competitors, Ukrainian players, they're my colleagues too, kind of thing. She's never said, well, we're not having those discussions, and I think that's very important to recognize. I also think it's been, and just to move on to the other issue we're going to discuss, if you go online and you look up Azarenka at the moment, the first story you are going to get is going to be about this. And the second story is one that I think needed to get airtime in the last week. And unfortunately,
I was going to say, unfortunately, it hasn't. And I'm wondering, because I've seen tennis journalists or columnists or whatever they want to call themselves, like Simon Briggs and Kit Klarenberg, and then Ben Rothenberg, people who are three monkeys level of incompetence. They've seen no evil, they've heard no evil, and they won't speak about any of the evil that they have not seen or heard. People who have been informed about misdeeds from coaches, from officials, and they just keep quiet. Before we move on to that, that's the case, the Ferrer case. The tournament you mentioned about the tennis plays for peace, there was a number of players who were involved in this last week. Sorry, we said there's a comment in that Azarenka is very friendly to Ukraine. She keeps saying to have peace. That is true. With this, Kostyuk was one of the people who objected to Vika going into playing this tournament. She said no, she didn't want her to go into play. She felt uncomfortable. Other Ukrainian players who were there, Lesia Turenko, who's a good player, good doubles player as well, she was actually quite okay with it, but Kostyuk said no because she felt it was inappropriate. And the thing has gone from USTA removes, that's US Tennis Association, they have removed her. The Guardian were brilliant. They took a Reuters version of it, said that she pulls out, whereas Sports Illustrated says she was dropped from the Ukraine exhibition event. So, it was a difficult situation, and go ahead.
Me, I feel this is one of those things. The fact that she wanted to participate in the tournament, surely that is a very clear statement of what she feels is important here. And if you can't view participation in a tournament, which is literally friends of Ukraine, what more do you like? It's tennis for Ukraine. What do you need someone to do? Do they have to have it tattooed on their arm? Like, this is the thing that really bothers me here, that this isn't someone who is hiding behind. She's openly trying to participate. She's checking on Ukrainian colleagues. I just think that Kostya might have missed an opportunity here to have a huge name participating in a tournament that sends a very strong message of her thoughts on this.
This is it. And I mean, this is where we have to have a look as well at Kostyuk. I mean, she was a fabulous young junior. This is, of course, in March, the 2nd of March, when Azarenka came out and said that she was devastated by it. One of Kostyuk's points of view, or her reasoning behind not wanting a fellow tennis player to take part and also not to shake hands, well, especially not to take part in this tournament, was that she related back. Could you imagine if the Jewish people, that a German tennis player wanted to go play an exhibition to raise funds for Jewish people? It just was ridiculous. But again, this is a girl who has been raised relatively in privilege. She's been backed by, the funny thing is, she has been financed the whole way through up until last year, that we know for sure, to December 2021, by Igor Kolomoisky. And that's, of course, the guy who financed Zelensky's rise to the top.
I think there's a real discomfort I have with her comments. I had forgotten about those comments. Like, put it this way, I think it misses a bigger picture, and it misses the point that your message, by trying to turn up for events or to raise funds for one side in any sort of conflict, sends a clear message that you are in support of the people who are suffering as a result. And it's unfortunate, because maybe I appreciate her position, but I just think she missed a big opportunity here to perhaps appreciate the message that was genuinely coming across.
True. So with that, a missed opportunity which has deflected from other terrific work and terrific viewpoints that Victoria Azarenka has made, and that's, of course, with the French tennis player Ferrer, who recently came out with inappropriate sexual behavior and advances from coaches, and also in her own case. A really horrible situation. I've spoken about it, actually spoken about many, I've written about it, spoken about it on the radio, on this here as well. Tell us a bit about it, because this is something that really I think everyone needs to hear, because it actually relates to what we're going to speak about with Joe Papp soon.
So a big part of what Fiona discussed was her abuse between the ages of 15 and 17 by a very specific coach, sexual abuse. And I think the big discussion that has come to the fore, and that maybe may have been missed by a lot of media who are focusing on a handshake, was the fact that, as Azarenka was talking about, the lack of safeguards, because again, she is a spokeswoman for the sport, talking about the lack of safeguards in place. She actually referenced, and I think this was the bit that really should have been picked up on by the media. She has a 5-year-old son. I could be wrong, he may be 4. And she said if she had a daughter, she would have to think carefully about having her participate. Now, not to disparage from the sport, I think it's the level of oversight. Who's checking? These are young women who, and again, young boys as well, let's not just be sexist in terms of it, but who are spending large amounts of time with a coach. Once they get to a higher level, they're often spending large amounts of time unsupervised. And I think if Fiona's case is just a really harrowing example of a young lady who, between, like, it's an extended period of time, it's a specific individual, and I think there has to be a point where tennis has to go. Tennis has done immense work on dealing with things like match fixing. The tennis integrity unit, they've gone, here is an issue in tennis that's huge. Let's throw everything we can at it. We may not fix it, but we're going to make every effort. And I just think if you put that much time into safeguarding for match fixing, you need to put 10 times that amount of time into safeguarding young people who are in a situation where it's not a team sport. There is a lot of alone time with a coach. There are long hours. There's a lot of lack of supervision. And you do, unfortunately, by the nature of the sport, you have parents who are particularly focused on their children being the best, who are not in a bad way, but they're trusting coaches who have got their children to this stage. And unfortunately, they're also, because of that level of trust, children are out of sight, and that's normal in a lot of sports. But you just need to look at ways to really safeguard. And I think 2 years of a young lady's life enduring such an abuse at the hands of someone who not only did she trust, but her family also trusted, and other people around her. It was harrowing to have the level of detail that was coming out. And it's also very important that this should be the main story right now in tennis, in the context of this is going to affect and continues to affect. Like, there is so limited in the safeguards that are in place. Like, you'd have nearly more safeguards in terms of if you're playing tennis in a school, because of the fact that everyone has to be vetted.
But Isa, they like that's bad for business. I can just tell you that here, and for parents as well. And I've told this story before about the young girl who I warned, a very well-known coach. I I've named him before, written him before, but he was from Belgium, now based in Switzerland, and the parents were sending their daughter there, and I said, don't send him there because he will abuse her. That's it. He's a pedophile. Don't send him there. And they were like, oh, well, we don't know. And the fun thing was, I said, look, this is what he's going to do. He's going to say, I always say, it's like she's bad balance, bad attitude, and she's overweight. Now, the girl was like a stick, 16-year-old stick. And the parents looked at each other and looked at me, and I said, you've already sent her there. I said, well, we sent her for a week. I said, well, I hope to God he hasn't started to abuse her. And the parents, the key thing was, what that killed me. This is one of the reasons why I walked away from working with sports people. And I said, why would you put your child at that risk, you know? And the mother, the thing that sticks to me, the mother was like, well, he gets results. And
So-
this is the same, that's the killer. Parents are prepared to do it, and they send their kids to the best football coaches, the best basketball coaches, hockey coaches for success.
I always think the one thing that sticks in my mind when you think of the amount of trust and faith people put in coaches or in those associated with their coaching, and in fairness, the manipulation and the level of twisting that was done. But the likes of Larry Nassar with the gymnastics in the USA, he abused young ladies while their parents were in the room or just outside, because that's the level of manipulation in terms of, he was saying, because they trusted as a he's not a doctor in the true sense of the word, but because he was a medical professional in his area, that they trusted what he was saying and believed him. And I think where you're putting so much faith into someone, you're going to have parents who are going to trust that this person is the best at what he's doing. They're not going to overly quiz what's happening outside of the time or what's happening. Because also, parents have a thing of, they want to know how their children are doing in terms of results, but you don't want to push them away from a sport. So the onus goes not just from the parents now, the onus goes onto the sport. And that's where the onus needs to be, because you're also going to have kids coming into sports whose parents don't have that level of understanding, of questioning everything, of wanting to constantly be there. You're not going to have, every parent isn't going to be like, you're not going to have the Williamses where he's sitting in the crowd. He's there for everything. He's there as part of their lives. You're going to have parents who are out of sight, out of mind, can't control the situation, feel like you've kids going on scholarships, you've kids who are away from home. The sport has to protect them. And that's
but again, it's bad for business, because if they went to do it, and I reported this at different times. In a tournament in Šibenik in Croatia, I reported it. In England, I reported it. In different places, I've reported inappropriate behaviour. Even in Egypt, I got one of my players to report. Well, not got her. She said, "What do I do?" So she went and reported inappropriate behaviour between either older players and players, coaches, and so on, and even grooming that was going on with older lesbian players. And when I reported it, or when one of our players reported it, was like, kind of like, do you want to be blacklisted? Do you want to be an outsider? You just shut your mouth and get on with it. So look, we're going to move on to the next one. So hopefully, I hope to God that people will actually look at this as well. It's been very good for the International Tennis Federation that people are looking at this stupid non-handshake and non-event compared to something that's more important. But we'll go on to the very, very next one. So just back in just one moment with our talking points of the week. Okay, so we are back, and this talking point is one regarding a young lady from, she's from Maryland, I believe, but she's playing her volleyball as a scholarship student. She's a sophomore at Duke University. Now, this whole situation, we're going to start from the start, okay? So this young lady, Rachel Richardson, she was heckled with racial slurs. BYU is Brigham Young University. It is the Mormon University out in Oregon. It's a very, very strange situation. Isel, tell us a little bit about it, because we're going to progress this until the most recent moment, and it's very, very strange.
So we obviously, as you can see from the story we have up on screen previously, there was accusations basically of racist abuse during the course of a game. The coach obviously felt very strongly about this, and then there was obviously some very open condemnation that nothing was happening in relation to it. And BYU came under pressure to come out and say something. So BYU did what any university did and took swift action. However, their swift action was to suggest that this never happened. They basically are shutting down the idea that, in questioning whether these racial slurs in fact happened. Now, I don't want to cast aspersions on Utah. However, I think we are dealing with an area where there may be overtones of racist language occasionally. And I think to accuse not just a player, because it's to accuse the coach of the team and the team that they have made up racial slurs when they clearly felt so uncomfortable that they couldn't continue, is a really serious matter. And I just think it's a very strange situation. The normal reaction here would be to apologize and sanction players, but instead what they're saying is, we're not going to sanction in terms of we don't believe this happened, or we're suggesting it didn't happen. And I think Alan has left himself on mute. So whatever Alan is saying is not in fact happening.
I'm on mute. So yes, thank you very much. What I wanted to say was that there was somebody they removed, they escorted from there.
They removed the ban, but then said that they didn't feel that they had made racist comments.
Yeah, it was someone who was like with Asperger's or something like that, or autistic, who was misbehaving, who wasn't even a student at BYU, and they removed them from Utah Valley University. So they removed that person. Now, what Duke were saying was that it even increased. It was more, more racial abuse. It got worse as the game went on. The fourth set, sorry, they won 3-1. The fourth set, when they were back down to that end, the student section, which has since been closed, that even greater abuse came on. And as the story went on, she was brought onto, I think, Between the Lines on ESPN, and detailed it. But she actually wasn't first with the story. It was actually her grandmother was first with the story, and she was the one who broke it. And this is what she tweeted: "My goddaughter is the only black starter for Duke's volleyball team. While playing yesterday, she was called an N-word every time she served." They were, her father then was saying that there was a policeman was sent down there, but there was no policeman there. That they had, the whole team had heard it, but no one else had reported, just Richardson. It just seems, not that they were correct, but just seems that maybe she heard something but made more out of it, Isolt.
I would wonder more so if the positioning was, you're in where you were in at that game, and perhaps people don't want to think they hear things like that. I think often, the way if someone shouts something abusive, it doesn't necessarily need to be something like that, or something rude. You'll often have a case of someone will hear it very clearly because they know it's directed at them. And in a stadium filled with very few people or very many people, you will hear the thing that's directed at you. I remember years ago being at a hurling match, and I heard a very unpleasant chant from behind me. Now, when I say chant, there were at best 5 or 6 guys saying it. I was in a terrace, and I picked it up. And I know the player it was directed at. Stadium was very, very busy. I didn't see anyone else turning around to look other than that player, and I was shocked. Now, this is a good, oh my God, it's about 15 years ago. I wouldn't go to a terrace stand now. But I remember noticing him turn around at the chant. And I just thought, how does he hear that and no one else is turning around? And I actually then realized afterwards, it was probably because a lot of people don't want to turn around and acknowledge what they've just heard. And I just think for a grandmother to openly come out and say it, it's of no benefit to Rachel to come out and say, I was racially abused. If anything, it puts a spotlight on her that is incredibly uncomfortable. And I just think it's a very difficult position. And the fact that they removed someone, it's very easy to say, we removed someone who's being disruptive. They weren't racially abusing her. Okay, what about the rest of the crowd?
They said that this is the next one. They said that he was banned, was not seen yelling racial slurs. We a message in saying that there was no they didn't think there was a video. There's no video. Yeah, well, this is the thing. They investigated. Police went in and investigated. Some of the people from Duke as well were a little bit reticent, but an awful lot of other teams then they wore black shirts to support, to fight racism, for example. And this is from NPR, and NPR we know is very much liberal, left wing, and they're reporting it that there was no proof, but it still seems, I don't know, like as you said, it could have been just that one person or a few people had said it, but on the videos there were videos shown from the game, but there was okay, as you said, maybe she heard it, but didn't seem to be any audible chants or abuse being made. And now it's turned around back, and the cannons are being turned on the grandmother because she has had a lot of issues with saying not polite things about white people, Mexican people, Asian people. Do you think that that's just an attempt to muddy the waters to sort of make it more difficult to make a case if it comes to it?
It obviously is very easy. That's the thing. It's very easy to dig up dirt on people and to try and water down in terms of anything they've said. And I appreciate that. But at the end of the day, if a player is saying she's been racially abused, and let's call a spade a spade. She was the only black player on the court. So she's the only one who it could possibly have been directed at if they're making chants like that. And perhaps the demographic might speak a lot to itself. Like, are the rest of the players on either side having to deal with racism? Is it something that they've become accustomed to? Or is it something that is almost accepted to a point that it's not noticed because it's not directed at them? I just think it's a very weird accusation to make if it isn't true. But it's also the way they've come out. And unfortunately, I actually think the blatant denial of racism makes it worse. If they said we couldn't identify someone in the crowd, we felt there may have been some of this, we will look into it further. But to suggest that there's absolutely none is almost like, if anyone can show otherwise, you're in the wrong, because it's quite clear. It's just the blanketness of both sides is very strange.
This is it. I mean, with the grandmother is running for the midterms in America. She's running for election. So, and like that's not to take away anything from her or what she said. Some of the stuff she's come out with, she's used very, I can say, emotive or racist language, which is really good. And actually, Rachel has actually downplayed this now. She's kind of saying, look, we have to treat people decently, and that's it. When, for example, when the shooting took place in like Uvalde, she said that like Fox News is breathing a sigh of relief. It's not a white kid. She seems to be pushing the narrative all the time, and as you said, like that, there's one side saying we don't have any audio evidence, we don't have any video evidence. The guy we removed was a bit strange. He wasn't one of our students. And then the grandmother who keeps pushing, saying that it's racism, and we have to protect black kids. Why can't they just have a discussion on it? Because even meet somewhere halfway, because this seems to be getting out of control as well.
It's a very difficult position for, I suppose, it's a difficult conversation for people to have. And when people don't want to have difficult conversations, rather than having them, people become polarized in their views, and everything can be interpreted a certain way. Certain words have only one meaning, though, to be very clear. If that's used, it has only one meaning. But I think you're also dealing with a demographic where you have one black player out of two teams, that it kind of, it says it all about the demographic you're dealing with. And I can understand why, as a result, it can make a situation very difficult to have a discussion, because who are you having a discussion with? You're having a discussion with one player, making her feel alienated in amongst a group. So it's very strange. Normally with these things, I suppose in the world we live in, there's always someone has picked something up on video, or there's always someone who has something.
This is it.
But then it depends whose supporters are providing the videos.
Well, there you go. And I mean, but always this finds a way out. And this reminds me, I don't know, of that guy, Bubba Watson, the NASCAR driver. And when they said that when they hung a noose from his garage, but it wasn't. It was just the loop that you pull down to shut the door. And if you perceive you could be about to be abused, like, that's the thing. It's a huge thing. If everything is ingrained in your life to think that people may potentially be racist towards you, then I can completely understand why he could look at something and go, I'm the only black driver in here. This is it. Like, it's an understandable reaction. I think that there are these kind of grifters then who work around it. He might have said, oh, this seems a bit strange. And then someone could explain to him and said, no, but listen, not to worry. This is always here. We're sorry about that, and don't worry about it. But the media from both sides, from all sides, we're going to make so much money off this. And all the people who want to sort of virtuous thing, they're going to lamp into this and go, oh, this is great.
Frightening place to live in terms of mentally, to you've endured so much racism, or you're in an area that you feel the potential for it is so high that you see something and that is your gut reaction. And that's completely understandable because it's reflective of the culture around you. It's very, very tough.
So we've had to, our news story and our talking point, they're both very similar in that you've got two sides that are completely unwilling and unable to mesh, or not unwilling, but at least there's one side that's like pushing something, and they're like, no, and then the other side is kind of trying to defend itself and say, look, like, you know, BYU saying, look, like racism rotten, we don't want this, we treated people out, we don't want this, but it doesn't seem to be enough. Okay, Isa, we're going to move on. We're going to go out to a short little break and come back with Joe Papp. So I know Isa and I are going to watch this together. I just want to say we're going to come back after the break straight into the first part of the video. It's a little bit difficult to watch what Joe speaks about. So that's just to forewarn you, and we'll speak about it as well afterwards. So just, you know, if you feel a bit like unsettled or nervous about the first part of this interview, you know, you can just, speak to somebody, okay? Just again, I'm forewarning you, said it might be a little bit difficult for some people. So forgive us for that and bear with us, and we'll come back straight away with Joe in just one moment. It's good you mentioned Nairo Quintana, the Colombian. I mean, he tested positive for a painkiller, tramadol, which is widely used, even in football, you know, in soccer, association football, and it's very, very powerful, and they use it. And I've spoken with people who they were cycling journalism and with cycling as well. Said it has the effect sometimes that, you know, some of the crashes are due to this. No, I take that with a grain of salt.
That I don't doubt that, actually, because I mean, ironically, they gave me tramadol when I crashed in Italy, and it was incredibly powerful and made you kind of loopy. And to think about, and to think about like using that on the bike. I mean, yeah, for sure it works to deaden pain, but like, yeah, I mean, to be a pro cyclist is to, you know, be like a perfectionist as far as, you know, your skills, like you and to have absolute trust in the guys you're racing against. And I mean, how are you going to be able to manifest that if you're basically high on a narcotic?
But that's, you know, I always go back to this joke by Willie Nelson. It was like, you know, when I took drugs, I couldn't even find my bike. You know, it was that kind of. But again, as you said, if someone's using something and they're not in control, you know, I know people complain about, say, boxing, when boxers are testing positive for, like, you know, Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, they've used some drugs, or Alexander Povetkin, they've used drugs, and it's dangerous because it's a combat sport and so on and so forth. Cycling is just as deadly because, you know, again, you're in a bunch, you lose control of the bike and go down. So, you know, in watching that, I mean, again, I just a couple of years ago, I think it was 2020, I watched my full Tour de France. The first time in a long time, I think it was actually since Floyd Landis got done, because I was watching that in Croatia. I remember just thinking, you know, at the time, okay, this is ridiculous, and he got done. And then I watched it again 2020, so 14-year gap. There's nothing better to watch than, for me, the Tour de France. It's amazing, it's beautiful, it's sensual, it's something amazing that and sensual as in it's an assault on the ears and the eyes. When you're watching it this time, did you just enjoy it?
There were moments, yeah, for sure, where I absolutely enjoyed it. You know, cracked a beer and, you know, in the afternoon and watched it outside in the beautiful sun. And yeah, it is. I mean, it's an amazing spectacle, and you just can't think too hard about it. You know, you just can't. You have to look at it as entertainment, I think, if you want to enjoy it.
Just going to pause it for that moment, because the next section, we spoke with tramadol and the danger of this extremely powerful painkiller. What we're going to come on to next is again, this part is going to be a bit difficult. So again, just bear with us, and we'll discuss it, of course, at the end of the next segment. You mentioned that I think it was when you were cycling, you were abused by a teammate. How difficult was that to come to terms with as a young athlete?
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and yeah, that's something I haven't thought about for a while. But yeah, it happened. Where an older teammate who was a mentor sexually abused me, and it was, yeah, something I wouldn't wish on anyone else to ever experience, because it, you know, even though physically it wasn't that big of a violation per se, but boy, like psychologically and emotionally, what a blow.
What year range did it happen, Joe? Not the exact year, because I don't want people to go digging and go, oh, it's this. Or what year range was it, Joe?
It happened when I was a junior, so
okay.
Under 18. And my teammate was over 18. So an adult preying on a kid, basically.
Okay, so this is something, because again, I've had huge issues around child safety in sport. We've spoken with, for example, Jennifer Say, the former US champion gymnast, who really had a lot to bring out about it as well, from her own time, from other. She was behind Athlete A, the award-winning documentary film about US gymnastics, and of course spoke with John Nichols, and the father of Maggie Nichols, who was who was Athlete A in the sexual abuse case against Larry Nassar. In that sense, how did it affect your physical safety? Is one thing. Physical safety, you can get a gun and shoot someone, but how did it affect your emotional safety? Because just a couple of years before, or a few years before that, you'd lost your dad. Did it, and you're still developing as a young man. How long did that impact last, Joe?
I think it probably is something that still endures to this day to a degree. I mean, I don't think not going to, I mean, it's not like manifest every moment or anything like that, but I don't think you can go to as much therapy you want or is recommended, and, it still doesn't erase what happened to you. I mean, that's something that you have to live with for, the rest of your life. And again, I mean, I would not wish that experience on anyone. And yeah, it's really lamentable that happened.
And that person never was brought to justice for his behavior?
He wasn't brought to justice for that. I mean, the guy had his own problems and then did face criminal liability for something else. But I mean, he was a troubled soul. Okay.
No, and look, Joe, there's no excuse for that. There's no excuse for child abuse. I mean, and again, you were a child in the eyes of the law. So that's where standing that. And yes, we can all have reasons why, and you had lots of reasons why you could do, like, we all have reasons to do whatever we want, but we still don't, do what he did.
I mean, honestly, like I guess thinking back, I'm surprised that kind of stuff didn't happen more often, because there was especially in amateur cycling, like there were age discrepancies and older riders mentoring younger riders, and cycling is just not that well funded of a sport in the US. And I think the potential, like now, looking back on it, like there were certainly a lot of situations where that could have happened, but I mean, hopefully it didn't. Can you think of something that should be less to happen in sport than like abuse like that, right? Like,
no. I mean, I'll tell a very short, quick story, Joe. And this is something like I've coached in different sports, from boxing to soccer to rugby and Gaelic games, Gaelic football and hurling. We were down at a hurling camp. There were 6 of our Irish counties. Most of them you'd have cycled in, actually. So 6 of our Irish counties. And we were there, and there were 6 groups of under 14s, so young kids, or under, I think, 12 or 14s. And so I just come back from Saudi Arabia, 2003, and I went down, and it was amazing. We're all up in this in the summertime in a school with dorms, like dormitories inside. So in the centre of like in Kilkenny, the hurling capital of Ireland. This was hurling training, and a coach from another county, an assistant coach whose son was playing on the team, went out. He was from that area. He went out drinking with his friends. But we all the other coaches came back with the kids, got the kids to sleep, and then kind of basically you stood guard all night, basically making sure the kids weren't acting like little idiots, which they did. It showed how they do it, and you know yourself. And it's kind of like, boys, will be up at 8 in the morning for breakfast? Yeah, fine. Like 2 in the morning, you hear them like tiptoeing down. I mean, they weren't drinking or smoking, or they were just basically, some of them bought Coca-Cola, like seriously bought a bottle of Coca-Cola and bags of like chips in America. Or
crisps.
And they're all there, like, in one of the rooms, or they're playing cards, or they're like, and they didn't have mobile phones as well. So against 2003. So anyway, one guy came in, this coach came back in, and one of the kids, I heard him up. He's one of the more active kids, like I say, great kid, like really, really great kid. And he's a bit of a troublemaker in a way, but we can handle him well, and a great athlete. And I heard him moving around, and so at 2 in the morning, I went there, what the hell are you doing? He goes, there's someone came in my room. It's like, what? I said, yeah, he came into my room. It's like, well, where's your roommate? He goes, oh, he's down here as well. I said, what do you mean? This fella came into the room, and the both of us jumped up and we ran out. I said, hold on, a fella came into your room. What did he do? He just like fell down on the bed. So immediately I got my hurling stick, went down. Guy was gone, but there was vomit in the sink, vomit on the floor, and so obviously it was very obvious. Something happened. So I thought, did he touch it? No, nothing. He just walked in, like fell over the end of the bed, and that was it. So eventually, so the guy had mixed up his room. He came in. He'd actually come in through a back door. Climbed in, because I always locked up because that stopped the kids from going in. So he climbed in through a window or door, and came into the room, which was open because the boys were still up making mischief.
Sure.
He came in, fell across the end of the bed, and vomited. But the boys didn't know; they just ran. So we reported. The next morning, the kids are out doing their training preparation for games, and the head of the regional council was there, as in the sports council. The head of local police, they all came in and said, okay, that guy has been removed. He has been given a lifetime ban from Gaelic games. I said, but wait. He didn't abuse it. He just literally came in drunk, and he said, no, said this is a serious child, welfare issue, and that's it. Should he have gone to jail? No, it was an overreaction. The guy's kid was playing for another team. He was stigmatized because his father walked into a room with 2 young boys and then fell down drunk and got sick.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, not to keep going on this topic, but
no, it's a good topic, Joe. It's a good topic because parents are going to be watching this, Joe, and they need to know what to look out for.
Especially because cycling is an international sport, and even at the junior level, like kids could travel internationally to race, and outside of America, I mean, there's certainly countries in which like child safeguarding is not as like much of a priority, and you go to some of these races and realize like what. I don't want to say that the security is lax, but I mean, it's an environment in which like bad things can happen. And yeah, I mean, the best thing a parent can do is to arm their kids with an understanding of what's appropriate and what's inappropriate, and give them the capacity to do what they can to protect themselves, and also hold accountable the adults who are supposed to be looking out for them.
And even with that, Joe, it's not protection enough. Like even giving your kids the ability to say no, or to go run off and get another adult, or to scream, or to it's never enough, but at the same time, you have to do the most you can as a parent. So it is that case. So if you found any of that disturbing or worrying, it is okay to feel like that and to speak with somebody. You can get in contact with us, of course, and we'll guide you to services that can help you out. And again, it's like with Joe, as you said, like you've been through counselling, and that also that you have to deal with it. It never goes away, but you have to deal with it. So we'll move on to something less upsetting and more disturbing. As disturbing, and one is a French cycling legend who was awarded a special yellow jersey this year at the end of the Tour de France, and a person who was buying EPO, this performance-enhancing drug, directly from Joe, was charged with it, was accepted with it, and is still treated as a superhero in France. That's, of course, Jeannie Longo. So this is our last part, and we'll come back, and myself and Lisa will have a brief chat. Joe, I wanted to wrap up on a couple of small things. One, that it was something that you tweeted out around a certain kind of legend of French cycling, a 25-time French champion, a 13-time world champion, Jeannie Longo. And she was given a special yellow jersey at the Tour de France, the Women's Tour de France. Why is she still loved, respected, when she's been done before for testing positive for ephedrine, and she got a 1-month ban 30 odd years ago, nearly 40 years ago, and a lot later you were selling EPO to her. So why is she still there, Joe? And tell us the story. How did you end up getting to this legend, like an Olympic champion from 96? How did you end up supplying her with drugs?
Yeah, I mean, the long and the short of it was that her husband reached out to me to provide them with EPO, and I did. And so to see her getting that yellow jersey was insane, absolutely deranged. Just like, what is rotten in France that someone like that would be celebrated? It was surreal to see. I didn't know. I didn't watch all of the Women's Tour de France, and somebody tweeted me that, sent me a picture, and I just about insane, just insane. Her husband literally bought EPO for me, specified that it was for her, asked if he could send it, like, I think if I recall correctly, like to the mother-in-law's house, or like to somebody else's address, and have it paid for by another party. But no doubt in my mind that that EPO was for the benefit of Jeannie Longo, and there she was on the, being feted at the tour.
Joe, this comes back to something that I mentioned already twice. Maybe third time lucky we'll get it. Is there this snobbishness that the French don't dope, but the dirty Americans and dirty Brits do? That they're worthy of getting urine thrown over them, but the brave, battling French are allowed away with it?
When you put it like that, and we think of that question in the context of Jeannie Longo, it certainly seems like the French are willing to tolerate a bit more from their own.
This is Jeannie, obviously, on the right-hand side, Joe. And again, as I said, this is a phenomenal legend of cycling, but has been done for doping, but they let away with it. Joe, do you think there's in America, for example, USADA, the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, they have no control over major league sports, right, where we know there are problems, and we kind of accept it because that's, for American football, if you're going to smash into other guys of 150 kilos and you're smashing into each other day after day after day in training, you need something to get onto the pitch for a match. Do you think that it's just that ultimately the authorities kind of accept what they can can and can't control, and they're going to just keep the numbers ticking over as in who they catch. Is that more important than actually cleaning up sport?
I think that's a good question, Alan. And for one to answer that honestly, it doesn't produce a really super hopeful reaction, because yeah, I mean, it's always easy, even with whether it's anti-doping, sports focused, or even law enforcement, like the people in charge want to catch the people who are easiest to catch. They don't want to, invest the resources in tough, hard cases that they might not win. They want to take the easy wins, pull from the low-hanging fruit. I'm amazed that they held Armstrong accountable. Honestly, I'm amazed in the end that they got him.
That's something still. It baffles me of how I think the only reason, and I always say this, the only reason they got him in the end was just Dustin Hoffman wanted his money back. Of course, I'm quoting the movie, the movie called The Program. Joe, before we end up, what would you do differently if you would do anything differently at all? Because I think, as you said already, regretting doing something, that's nonsense. You do something, it's got you to where you are now. What would you do differently if you were the manager of a young cyclist, of a young Joe Papp? If you were his manager, what would you do?
I think something I would want to convey to any cyclist, any athlete, is that the sport is not, any sport is, it shouldn't be the be all end all of your identity. And I mean, it's certainly, to be good at sport, to succeed at sport, you need to be obsessed with it, and it has to be the focus of your life. And yet at the same time, it can't be the focus of your life forever. And I mean, that for me was what I didn't understand at the time. And that was ultimately what led to my downfall, I think. Just not realizing that that sport ultimately is temporary, and that there's a whole world and a whole rest of your life out there.
Sport is ultimately temporary, and there's a whole rest of your life out there. Isolt, I do believe we really saved the best until last with Joe. Very open, very raw, very honest. It was, to be honest, Joe and I stayed on speaking for a lot longer after that call. The interview, we had a very good chat, but it was very, very difficult. What for you stood out from that piece?
I suppose it's all very difficult listening, and I think throughout everything, Joe has been exceptionally open in discussing, having, I suppose, those difficult conversations. And I know I referenced difficult conversations in a different context earlier, but they're difficult conversations to have, and they're extremely important. Already on tonight's show, we have discussed the concerns about safeguarding in tennis, and he made the point there about cycling's an underfunded sport, and particularly for underfunded sports where you're away from a centralized location. Cycling, by its nature, you're not just in one place, and you're not necessarily supervised in large groups. It's very frightening to imagine what can happen when safeguards aren't in place. And this, obviously, Joe's own personal experiences are from some years ago. In the intervening period, do we think much has changed? Are there more positions where you're safeguarding players? I actually had a discussion, and it just, what Joe said there about older players, older participants and younger participants mixing or supervising. I actually had a discussion during the course of this week.
But you froze, or we just...
Oh,
so just, you said you froze when you're saying competitors mixing.
So it's about, I suppose, the idea that you'd have younger, because of the age disparities, that sometimes they're all participating together, or older players are supervising. I actually had a discussion with a neighbour during the week, and we were discussing that one of the local sporting teams, in the school, they don't have coaches for one particular area. So what they're actually doing as an older year are mentoring the first years in one particular sport, and there's no concerns about welfare, but the idea is that they're doing the coaching. And I was like, what I said to her was, oh, I wouldn't have thought they'd have, firstly, the ability. Coaching is a skill, and it's also a lot of pressure, but it also has, in my head, I was going, it has the risk of bullying. And my head went to bullying. When you put in a position where you have young athletes left alone with older athletes who are in a position of power and a position of trust, because where parents might look to coaches, are they going to look at other athletes and think that's a risk to my child in the same way?
There's a balance. There is that balance. Like I know myself, like playing, as a 16-year-old playing men's soccer, for example, and I never had any issues, but that's because there was people there who might have been difficult, but they were actually very good natured overall. So they were. I had great time for them and great time with them.
That's the majority of participants' experience. We like to hope.
And but that's a team, Isla. That's a team. But if you look at, as you mentioned, cycling, look at tennis, like we discussed. Look at swimming, where safeguards in many places where we know, for example, coaches continually got jobs even though they're being shuffled around, and we discussed this before. Keen, a friend of ours from the show, said that it certainly has to be admired just by Joe's discussion, because you never hear it during a person's career during the certain factors, of course, to do with each sport, a code of conduct, so to speak. It could also be, we call it omerta as well, and we discussed that with Joe before, but the omerta around all these finishes. And to wrap up on that, what in our three pieces, like if you give 3 points that you can remember from chatting with Joe, what have stuck with you?
There have been a few things. I think on the first episode, one of the things Joe basically talked about was that the minute he was doping, like that it almost felt like the two went hand in hand, that you couldn't do one without the other. And I think that's it's a very scary reflection of the sport, and it's a very sad reflection of the sport. I also think one of the things that really stuck out from tonight, obviously, the discussion of abuse is a very, very difficult but important topic to discuss. And I think finally, perhaps in terms of his own admissions as regards doping, I think we all have to stop and kind of think about the fact that we're willing to crucify some people, as you have very well put it, that is there a sense of certain countries almost refuse to see doping in their midst. We don't stop and question, and we need to question if the results begin to be questionable. We need to look at people, and we need to be careful who we put on a pedestal, particularly post-career, because of what might come out in the morning. And let's not, like, we've seen it with that biggest name that cycling has ever had. And I think we just need to be very, very careful. And I think when someone has made open claims about someone, they need to be fully investigated to the nth degree before you suggest that they need to be put on, again, such a level as we saw at the end of the tour. Because it obviously, you could hear it in Joe's voice, or in my view, you could hear it in Joe's voice, that it galled him, and understandably.
Yeah, I mean, again, and I brought it up with him. We joked as it was like that. Wrapping the flag around you and cheer for your country. We've seen it this weekend with the Irish runner Ciara McGeehan, who shattered her own record, the Irish record, it's for 27 years, I think it was, by over 2 seconds. At that stage in her career, any sports journalist would have saw it, or sports fan would kind of go, that's great, let's just hope she did it clean. And that's all you can say. And if she has done it clean, brilliant. If she hasn't done it clean, you've covered yourself. But also you have to have that healthy skepticism, because we see again and again and again that this happens.
It's not a reflection of the individuals. And I think that's the important thing. People take skepticism and they think that it's questioning someone's character. It's not. Skepticism is there because there have been so many times. Being a sports fan is putting your utmost faith in the person you're supporting or cheering for. You buy into everything they do, to the extent that sports fans buy memorabilia. They go to games, they go to fights, they go to watch events, they go to see the Tour de France go by for all of 2 seconds, because they buy into wanting to believe. It's like when you have Santa, and when someone does the damage, any one athlete, you have to then have skepticism about everyone. And it's not in any way to detract from the individual. It's because, unfortunately, we're like that person who's been dumped repeatedly. We've had the heartbreak, and we need that level of skepticism so we can genuinely buy into the next.
Look, and again, this is, a lot of people who we would know. Pardon?
I sound very bitter.
No, it sounds very good. It sounds right. Look, Isa, there's people like that we discussed together as a group and in chats and in general, we discuss these things, and people we know as well who we have contact with, whether it be on Twitter or social media, and we discuss these things, and yet there will be some who'll say, you're all just bitter, or you're all conspiracy theorists. And I say, people, we know, Paul Kimmich, who was a guest of our show, said Lance is and went to court to prove it, was sued, was destroyed, was fired because he knew what was going on, and he said it clearly. People were like, "Why are you trying to ruin our buzz? What's wrong with you? You're a conspiracy theorist." Conspiracy is only a theory so long as it hasn't been admitted, and this is the case with this. Isa, before we go, because I want to do one small gift for you, but hot topic. You have two small things to go through, so fire away. All over to you.
So I'm gonna go very briefly touch on the first one, and I'm hoping that at some stage in the next few weeks I might get to expand on this topic a bit more. It's about the importance in any sort of combat sport of fair matchmaking. And the reason I bring this up is last night there were two big combat sport events. There was the UFC from Paris, which was obviously a monumental evening where they had some fantastic matchups, really good contests. And obviously it's very easy for them to have high matchups when they're not paying the athletes as well as they should. And they're also all under the one company. So they can match who they want with who they want. But it results in really good contests. The second combat sport event, which I watched last night, was from Liverpool. It was a boxer fight night, and the matchmaking was, apart from Natasha Jonas's fight where she became the unified world super welterweight champion, WBC and WBO champion. Apart from that, the rest of the matchmaking verged on the bizarre to the dangerous to the downright questionable. We had Fraser Clark, who was the former captain of Team GB for the last Olympics. He was matched against a guy who Fraser's fight was so poor that he had to apologise, it ended in the first round, to the people who had attended. He's lost 6 to 8 weeks of his life in a camp, paid for a camp to have a fight that really doesn't further his career. And as he's in his 30s, that really is not good enough. And then the main event, the opponent, it was Beefy Smith against a guy called Makawa, who he seemed to take a fake knee, spit out his gum shield, and do that twice while also feigning an ankle injury. So eventually the referee stepped in, and if you watch it back, it's very difficult to decide, had he just decided without taking any damage that was obvious to that point, because he was in the fight, whether he just didn't want to take any punches or whether it was a very specific and questionable moment of going down in a specific round twice, which is how it looked on second and third viewing back. But it's just, matchmaking really matters in fight sports. These are people's lives. They can get seriously injured, and it also impacts their career. If you go in and you have continual fights where you're just knocking people out or you're fighting lesser opponents, that doesn't teach you anything, doesn't benefit you, and it doesn't benefit bringing viewers into the sport either. No one wants to see mismatches continually. Maybe one on a card would be expected, but not throughout. And the second hot topic is I'm going to ask that everyone take a bit of time next weekend to watch what will be a really good spectacle of boxing. And I'm loath to say spectacle of women's boxing, but as it happens, Boxer are putting on a card from London next weekend, which is all women. Now, I don't agree with it because I think you could easily have the co-main and the main event. I think it would make more of a statement if they were on a men's mixed card and they still got the main spot, not just main events by virtue of being on a solely female card. Because Katie Taylor, obviously, her main event in Madison Square Gardens was above the men's events on that card. But next weekend, the two main fights to look out for would be Savannah Marshall and Clarissa Shields. Clarissa Shields, the Olympian, gold medalist from Flint, against Savannah Marshall, who is the woman trained by Tyson Fury's uncle, and she is a serious knockout merchant. So this will be a very big, tough fight for Clarissa. The only loss she has on her career as an amateur was against Savannah. So there's a big grudge match there. And the second is Michaela Meyer versus Alicia Baumgartner, both American, both going to try and unify. So it'll be an exciting night for women's fights, and you can expect there to potentially be knockouts, which is not something you normally get to say about women's boxing.
Okay, that is a good point. Just just so people understand that Fraser Clark, he went to 2-0. No, was he 2-0 before? He went to 3-0, didn't he?
He went to 3-0 on his first fight. His first fight was on the Amir Khan and Kell Brook card, and his opponent pulled out. So at the last minute, they recruited a man from the public workout. They picked up a guy who hadn't fought.
Oh, that's right. Some big fat. Yeah.
It's very difficult in terms of, there were a lot of mismatches last night, but in terms of the Fraser Clark one, I think it was particularly upsetting because he was upset, and like not just your average going, oh, I had a fight. You could tell it was embarrassing for him. He had people travel. Like, boxing fans are putting their hard-earned hands in their pockets and taking their hard-earned money, and they're not just, he isn't a local fighter, so they were traveling, the cost of hotels, we're in a cost of living crisis, they're doing all of this, and for him to be put in against an opponent like that is it's not a reflection on him, but he's also missing out on his kids' lives for however many weeks.
True, but look, on paper the guy he was fighting was unbeaten. He 7 wins.
It felt like, again, you know the way the padded record thing, because it didn't feel like anyone had.
I said that, I think it was last week or before, and as I said to people, if you show me a fight card, I'll tell you who's going to win, because all you have to do is analyze the fighters, who they fought, what they've beaten, and this guy Svetkov had 2 guys who had winning records, and both of them were useless. One was 6-5, it was 2-0.
So there's another thing in boxing where it's often, and you obviously know this, but I'm just articulating it. It's often more important to go in against someone who's considered a journeyman, who may have an awful record on paper, but is going to give you the rounds, and you get the opportunity to learn.
But those are agreed. Like I can tell you from experience in Germany, you go in to fight a guy, and even though you're the house fighter, so you're the guy who's on top, you get paid less than him. Yeah. He gets paid more to go in to work with you. And there's some of these fighters, and I've seen them from England, especially from England, the Eastern European guys, most of them they were good fighters. They have ability, but they never try, because they're just like traveling losers. Some of the guys from England who will get in to move around with you, they were sensational. They catch you, you're out. But Nobby Nobbs used to be the trainer from Birmingham. Brendan Ingle used to have his guys around him, but Nobby Nobbs especially, he would train guys who could actually do some damage, but they didn't. They went in to move around, to stay out of it. I don't know. Pro boxing's always been that way. So I just want to before we go, I have one more thing. Keane, or is it? So he said he agrees with Isel, said that we place so much faith in every sport we follow. It's become more common in recent years to finally open. You question different sporting achievements. That's it. And he also said he has next Saturday sorted out. So before we do, Isel, I know you love baseball, so I'm going to show you this one, right? You can tell me what happened next, and then we're going to let you go for the evening. So here we go. This is a good one. Actually, is Brian with you or no?
No, he's avoiding me.
All right, okay. Because I would say you can beat him on this one. You will beat him because you already understand the rhythm of
win here.
Okay, you'll just win the interest. Okay, so here we go. So what happens next on this? Okay, baseball.
Who hits a 1-0 pitch into right field? Runners at the corners with one away. Oh yeah, well they've got Rosario.
So that is it's international the World Championship. It was Puerto Rico and Holland. Of course, Holland very, very strong as well in baseball, very developed country. So what happened next, Isel?
I'm going to say the ball is hit and somehow the guy who was just doing the flapping of his arms like they're wings, he
The
gets
runner,
hit.
yeah. He
He's
reached.
getting. I was going to say he's going to get hit with the ball.
Actually, yeah, you are right. Not in the way you think it would be, but you are actually correct. I'll play it through. It's very, very brilliant.
Who hits a 1-0 pitch into right field. Runners at the corners with one away. Oh, yeah. Well, they've got Rosario scouted well. And then they go into first base, and Profar's out.
Yadier Molina does not take anything for granted. And then what does he do? He just nonchalantly looks and says, okay, gotcha.
Jurickson Profar was too busy getting the dugout going, and he is out at first base.
It's the rugby players who celebrate before they're over the line. Freddie Burns and Chris have done it before. Like,
I know, and so this is one where he's so busy, like, yeah, he got it, and he's like pumping him up, and as his foot is coming down on the base,
it's like,
that is just horrible. Okay, Isolt, thank you for we've agreed between us that Slapshot next week, the boys will be here with us and they're going to do it. So we have to punish Andrew Flint because he said he was at a hen party, or I don't know, stag do, or whatever it is he said.
They're nights. Common.
Yeah, very straight. Isolt, thank you very much. Have a terrific week.
So much.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks to all our viewers and everyone who wrote into us. Thank you very much for your time. And we put a link into the chat where you can find a fuller version of that Azarenka interview. And again, most important thing to understand is that we can all have different positions. I say this to Tim quite often as well, my son. We can have different positions, different points of view, but you know what? It's interesting to hear other people's points of views. It's interesting to tell them your points of views and see the reaction, whether it's like, oh, or it's like, good point. But the most important we can do is to listen. And if people want to listen to us, that's even better. But the most important thing is we just have to understand each other, have a bit of empathy. And when someone wants to reach out and do something good, sometimes we might just have to allow them. Okay. So on that note, I'm going to wish everyone a very good rest of your Sunday evening and have a great week ahead. So until next week, I'm all more saying take care of yourselves and each other.